to my channel. This is the 13th episode of the Meet the Pros series, a series where I interview professionals in the field of biology to help high school students interested in the subject. In today's episode, I will be interviewing Dr. Guru Madhavan. He is a biomedical engineer, author, senior director of programs at the National Academy of Engineering, and a normal Augustine senior scholar. And I'm delighted to have him with me here today. Thank you for being here, Dr. Madhavan.
Rishi, thank you so much for having me.
So I wanted to know, I just looked you up before all this started, and it said systems engineer was sort of kind of your background in coming into all of this. What was your inspiration for pursuing the engineering angle of biology and the tools and technologies rather than sort of the hard science itself?
I had a fairly mediocre track as a student. I think with practice and some tutoring and some extra diligence, I was able to pick up my math, eventually physics and chemistry. So I became solid in science.
Okay.
That allowed me to be competitive in what was a very hyper, rigidly competitive environment growing up in India.
Yeah.
And everyone around me was immersed in kind of a STEM type orientation.
Yeah.
So I thought that's what people did, and therefore I prepared myself for that as well, the track as well. So the last time I had biology in school was essentially like ninth grade or so, and I started specializing in engineering
Yeah.
starting 10th grade. So basically, that was a halt in my appreciation of biology. And then for college, I studied systems engineering, as we can generalize it right now. But I specifically looked into design of sensors, transducers, valves, as in like in refineries and so forth. And also how do you create digital control systems and so forth. So control theory had a major role in the foundations of what we now even call as modern systems engineering. So in a way, I was trained in the in a perfect confluence of electrical, mechanical, chemical engineering, and it was not until late in college, and until then, I had done many industry rounds as a junior engineer. But I think the real turning point for me happened when I was in a medical school at an imaging lab, when a kid was going through a scan in an MRI machine, which was brand new at that time for my city in India, and it was so high tech that they basically had a religious ceremony around it before inaugurating it.
Okay.
And then so I was one of those people who kind of was part of getting started stage. And at that point, I didn't know that kids could even have stroke. They called it cerebrovascular accident.
Okay.
And so this young kid was getting mapped by an MRI scanner, and I was sitting on the near the console trying to understand what was happening. There was the MRI technician, and then there's a physician who's asking to. So it was a completely immersive. What is going on there? There's something happening in the other side of the room, and then there's something here. And how are these things talking? Even though I had a perspective that could be, applied here, let's say from a refinery, or I worked for a candy factory before going to a hospital. So it was really interesting how these things coordinated with one another, especially dealing with extremely complex mechanisms. And keep in mind, the last time I had biology was at that point ninth grade.
Yeah.
So I really got interested in this fusion of engineering and biology.
Okay.
So that may have laid the seeds for me to become or transition from a control systems engineer into a complex systems engineer. So even in the early stages of my work in industry here in the United States, after I finished my master's degree in biomedical engineering, I did, fairly routine types of engineering. I mean, it is a extremely conservative industry, medical device, a lot of safety critical considerations. You just cannot mess around. Highly compliant, highly regulated industry. So all the things that I learned in the engineering tradition still applied. I was going
Hmm.
after efficiency, I was going after safety, I was going after reliability. Yet
Okay.
the technologies that we were creating ultimately interfaced human beings
Hmm.
and had a life-saving effect. So in this case, we were talking
Yeah.
about neuromuscular technologies, cardiovascular technologies, and so forth. So that really got me hyper interested in understanding biology, not just in a purely biological sense, but
Yeah.
also from a cultural and an anthropological sense. What does it actually mean, and how are these conditions even generated in the first case? So, of course, engineers try to bring in root cause analysis to understand why a system failed and so forth.
Yeah.
But to think about these complexities from a biological sense, you have to have a very different, very expansive um, kind of a mode or mindset. So that I think helped me bring together both the controls and the complexity
Hmm.
to kind of carve my own path in this line.
You mentioned so obviously the engineering mindset for biology. You mentioned cultural and anthropological. What does that exactly mean in terms of biology?
So, how do disease spread? Um, because of accumulated behaviors that we have all seen trying to change our own lives,
So these
but
are lifestyle
also, I mean,
behaviors,
pardon me?
sort of like accumulation of
Accumulation
lifestyle
of
behaviors. Okay.
habits and
Yeah.
behaviors and the
Yeah. Yeah.
norms and that we create, and then we all know what happens when individuals do it. Let's say if I adopt a behavior that might not be good for me, and I can see the effects immediately manifest over some time, over due
Yeah.
course, whatever it is.
Yeah.
What happens when a community does that? And each of
Oh.
the so it is a it's not just a mere
Okay.
addition of
Okay.
behaviors. For
Okay.
example, one of the things that really interested me was this was for my later technical work at the national academies on vaccine development.
Yeah.
And you really think about how local cultural practices can actually help spread a disease. For example, during the Ebola outbreak almost a decade ago,
Mm-hmm.
so there are communities in West Africa that did their funeral rituals or burial rituals
Mm-hmm.
in a fairly traditional way that they have done for thousands of years
Yeah.
before. But however, in a circumstance like this, um, how would you uh, engage with the community on this sensitive topic that is deeply rooted, yet is contributing to the disease progression?
Okay.
And so you can't just go and say, don't do this or do this kind of thing, because that's where you need to gain the trust in the community.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we're also living in a time where we like to outsource those sensitive responsibilities to technology.
Yeah.
So how do you think through these kinds of deeply human issues that otherwise are um, set aside as optional, even in modern engineering?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, many of us have gone into engineering because we didn't want to deal with humans.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but I think that still is the case. It's an ultimately a human
Yeah.
kind of a pact, so to speak, rather than a field or a
It's
specialty. It is
inseparable between the two.
exactly. And
Okay.
and I think that's where getting the evolutionary insights
Mm-hmm.
to guide engineering, and
Yeah.
also applying engineering insights to better apply evolution,
Mm-hmm.
is a serious opportunity and a challenge.
Okay. Do you think that is so? Obviously, right now, with sort of the dawn of AI, biology is going to have a very computational aspect towards it going into the near future. Do you think this sort of, I guess, your overlap with engineering is something that is also for the future as the way you see it?
Yeah, so I think most fields of science have become heavily computational, or at least intensive that way.
Yeah.
So, and of course, AI, everyone is talking about it from, from philosophical perspective, from a marketing
Yeah.
perspective, from a technical perspective. It is everywhere, and we're trying to make sense of it.
Yeah.
And even if you look at it from the how the classic um, mechanistic aspects of evolution, so to speak. I mean,
Hmm.
don't really make sense entirely when it comes
Okay.
to AI.
Yeah.
And we are even trying to see how it behaves and how it alters our behavior and response. So there's something deeply synergistic
Hmm.
going on here. Is it in a way it isn't that different than how, let's say, a medical device interacts with the human tissue? Let's
Okay.
say in vivo. So there's something
Yeah.
going on there. There's a
Hmm.
synergistic effect. But then in this case, you're seeing something on the screen and it's doing something to your brain. And how is that going to work? This is utterly non-invasive. I mean, in a literal sense, but also it's invasive in some other sense.
Hmm.
So we need to figure out how to do that. And I think bringing in the elements, the essentials of biology, considered very large, not
Yeah.
just, I'm not talking about test tubes in a lab, so
Yeah.
to speak,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
think it's a much broader perspective that we need to bring
Hmm.
to enable, to empower, and ultimately make engineering responsible
Yeah.
toward a technology that we know does affect our lives.
Okay. I want to take a pivot. You have a book called Applied Minds Think Like an Engineer. And I was looking into it. I think Google also put it sort of in the self-help genre. That was like something that it categorized it as. So I was wondering, why would you say it is important to think like an engineer, even if you're not an engineer by profession? Why is that
Um,
mindset sort of important for the general public?
I don't know if the publisher did it or not, or maybe Google automatically classified it based on what people felt about it. But in the book, I basically boil it down. So this was my first book. It's
Yeah.
exactly 10 years ago it was published. So
Mhm.
I'm happy that it has had a shelf life, so to speak.
Mhm.
But it was driven by my own basic understanding of how engineers actually think,
Yeah.
given the varieties and given the sheer differences in the conditions and the circumstances they operate in.
Okay.
And as a systems engineer myself, I think been in at least 10 distinct environments, but I'm able to carry forward some of the principles across these things.
Mhm.
But not everything can be brute force
Yeah.
applied or
Yeah. Yeah.
force
Yeah.
fit
Yeah.
into these things. So that's something one has to be wise about. So in Applied Minds, how engineers think, it was also called Think Like an Engineer
Yeah.
in the UK and Commonwealth. I boil it down to three essential ingredients.
Yeah.
First is to bring structure where there's none.
Okay.
And the second is the ability to work under constraints, create under constraints.
Okay.
And the third is the ability to make judicious trade offs. So, structure is your backbone. Okay. If you want to deal with the problem, or if you want to consider any problem as a system, whether it's, I don't know, a leaky faucet
Mhm.
or a failing power grid,
Mhm.
um, you are you need to engage with it. You need to understand what the gears are, what the basic motions are, and you must be able to diagram it
Okay.
in a standard engineering way. Of course, in complex systems, it becomes very
Mhm.
difficult. But let's just start with this basic
Yeah.
element here. Constraints are your reality check, like time, money, just physics
Yeah.
of it. They aren't necessarily roadblocks, they're actually a fuel to your creativity. And I think that's the whole idea of
Okay.
designing under constraints, because you are able to come up with newer ideas when you're actually put in a condition that suppresses you of something or another.
Yeah.
Okay, so they are guardrails that are actually giving rise to solutions in a
Okay.
simple way.
All right.
The trade-offs are the heart of engineering process here.
Mhm.
Nothing's perfect in life or in industry,
Mhm.
so you prioritize,
Okay.
and this kind of gets to the act that we do as human beings on a day-to-day basis. Whether it is bringing structure to where it's none, how do you operate when you have significant pressures and stresses that are affecting you, and then of course the ability to make trade-offs. So you prioritize. In engineering, it's often like speed over cost, or safety over flash, so to speak.
Mm,
So you cannot have everything in life, and
yeah.
that's where the realistic aspect of engineering comes into play. So structure, constraint, trade-offs, what I call the 1 2 3 punch of the engineering
Yeah.
mindset. They
Okay.
kind of, they help us engage with problem sets of different kinds and
Okay.
categories.
So, say someone is they can create structure when there's none. They can create a plan to execute a task, and they are creative. There may be constraints, but they can work around them. But say they're not good at making those judicious trade-offs, as you mentioned. How do you develop a certain pillar of thinking like an engineer if someone lacks in that domain?
So, uh, which actually, I mean, and I think the earliest exploration in my book actually led me to my second book because of the questions like the ones that you have just asked right now.
Hmm.
Now, how do you think about when you have way too many variables? It's not like a building a mouse or something like that
Yeah.
where you can actually think about structure in a way. But I think as long as you understand, so one of my civil engineering professors way back then, it was in the early stages of my education, told me that how do you look at two pieces of land with a river flowing in between,
Okay.
um, and you have to come up with a transportation mechanism for people from one part of the land to go to the other side of it.
Hmm.
You have to build a bridge
Yeah.
or a tunnel and everything. So
Hmm.
now, how do you um, get a feel for the problem set? It's a um, and the experience that he wanted us to get mentally, and
Hmm.
this is the whole idea of what's called um, the mind's eye, the engineering eye
Okay.
for this. How do you feel the stresses and the strains of the load bearing column of a bridge that doesn't even exist? It's only in your mind.
Okay.
And I
I
think
like
that
that.
is the kind of this imaginative potential, okay,
Yeah.
that the fact that you're able to see something there. But of course, we see some things illogically or extractively. Maybe we even see opportunities when we wouldn't want to see, we shouldn't want to see opportunities, or maybe we see opportunities that might be offensive to others and so forth. So those are
Hmm.
some interesting ethical dilemmas that come in. So
Yeah.
that kind of takes us from, how do you think about structure, constraints, and trade-offs in various aspects of life? If you want to be a little bit more aware of the environment that you're operating in, and I think that's perhaps why you have this self-help genre kind of thing. Now,
Yeah.
okay, now
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
how do you think like an engineer um, across these different situations
Hmm.
that we are confronted,
Yeah.
and also has this connection to this evolutionary approach that we were talking about
Hmm.
earlier, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
How does mother nature does this? I mean, like, in engineering, the first thing that I'm given is like a deadline. I have a budget, and then I have these tools,
Yeah.
and do something with it.
Hmm.
Maybe you have unlimited computational power or something like that, but then constraints differ across the time period that you're operating in. But mother nature takes her own time, doesn't follow any specific budget. No
Yeah.
one is directing her to do
Yeah.
this.
No constraints.
So you can see that's the best. It's kind of potential misuse of the word here, but I think it's the best designer in a way.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Kind of an evolutionary approach here,
Yeah.
and engineers, the good engineers, especially learn from those approaches. Do you always need this fast, rapid prototyping kind of approach, or can you take time to methodically
Mm.
shift and
Interesting.
shape the systems that you're engaging with? So, and I think it's not just about going and addressing the requirements of the next quarter for your company, but like, how do you think
Yeah.
1,000 years ahead of time?
Oh.
I mean, again, that is the kind of the longitudinal leap you have to think about it. And so, or even looking back and like going back to, like, I don't know, 500 BCE,
Hmm.
and
Okay.
how do you situate yourself and see what the engineers of that era did to think about this. So it is the kind of this matrix orientation, the ability to transfer your mind across context. So this is something very relevant in evolutionary design. They all about transcending the fitness landscape. So Mother Nature just keeps going here and there and see
Okay.
which optimum it reaches, and then gives it a chance and see what improvements can be made,
Mm.
and how the environment is conducive to those improvements or not. So
Yeah.
it is a very slow kind of approach, very non-linear approach,
Hmm.
that thanks to technologies that are enabled by AI,
Yeah.
can now allow us to do this fairly rapidly and inexpensively right now.
Mm.
So we have, it is a perfect convergence of these biological metaphors and mechanisms with the engineering goals and responsibilities, along with the tools and techniques that we now have that allow us to blend these things in a very inexpensive way, but to serve the sociological needs, planetary needs, which are altogether um, different approaches. If you learn from a bird and design a train and get some performance improvements or efficiency enhancements and everything, that's one thing. But what are the second order, third order impacts of that design over time? And those are all things that uh, um, that we have to really think about, and that innately requires a systems orientation here.
What do you mean by systems orientation?
The ability to understand how one thing affects
Everything
another.
else.
So, which is
Okay.
basically the idea of, this is the concept of sensitivity. Okay, you do
Got it.
something, what are the effects there?
Cause and
The
effect.
second
Okay.
is synergy.
Hmm.
Okay, can you do one thing and achieve multiple benefits at once?
Okay.
So, if so, what are those elements? So
Yeah.
that's the third is side effects. And as someone interested in the biological mechanisms here, you
Yeah.
understand, you try to intervene a system, and clearly you're going to have something that doesn't sit
Yeah.
well. So
Yeah.
you have sensitivities, you got synergies, and you got side
Side
effects,
effects.
which are kind of the essential elements for systems thinking. And of course, structure, constraint, and trade-off are kind of generally applicable across
Okay.
the engineering landscape, so to speak.
Hmm. So you have your other book, Wicked Problems. Um, I was watching, I think, an earlier podcast, and you defined it as a wicked problem is when a soft problem interacts with a hard problem, which interacts with a messy problem. And so, in a scenario that creates a wicked problem, well, first off, what would you define a wicked problem as for our audience? And then also, is that sort of a scenario where the three things you mentioned right now, synergy, side effects,
Sensitivity.
sensitivity, sorry, those three are extremely hard to use or sort of find?
Yeah, so I'm really glad you're digging into this one. It's basically, I mean, life's toughest
Yeah.
problems aren't neat little boxes. Okay, I
Yeah.
mean, they're all a collision of forces. We
Hmm.
started talking about that, but let's unpack this a bit.
Yeah.
Let's start with hard problems. Okay, these
Okay.
are the ones we can pin down. So if you want to design an app to keep track of your homework, for example,
Hmm.
I mean, there's a clear goal and there are rules like coding. You got the logic,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I don't know if you're using a computer, it's battery life and so things. So all
Yeah.
these things,
Yeah.
and and the homework has to yield some best answer that's acceptable for your teacher or for
Okay.
someone who is grading you. So
Yeah.
if you remix the right tools and whatever, create an environment, whatever it
Hmm.
is, it's bounded. So
Okay.
you know when it is solved
Yeah.
because it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
So airlines use this to check you in with the tap on your phone. Okay, taco trucks scan QR codes
Okay.
to give you fast food.
Yeah.
So hard problems kind of mix both tech and grit.
Okay. Tech and
Then
grit.
you've got soft problems,
Yeah.
and don't let that name fool you because they're brutal.
Hmm.
They live in the human universe here. I mean, behavior, emotions, power, uh, politics. You want to manufacture a car? Yeah, that's a hard problem. You bolt them all together, you're done.
Yeah.
Managing a city traffic, it's a soft problem, which is actually a harder problem.
Yeah.
So you want to add a lane? the congestion actually might worsen. We see this day in and day out here in DC, and you see that in New Jersey, New York all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So, and then how do you set the pricing for the tolls?
Hmm.
And not everyone can pay that. So every fix you bring in
Hmm.
actually creates a new headache because
Side effects. Side effects.
exactly,
Constant side effects. Okay.
and people don't act like equations. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so you don't solve these,
Okay.
you actually resolve these. So you aim for something that's good enough,
Uh,
but knowing that the best possible answer, like you did for your homework and the hard
hmm
problems, is just not achievable because you're juggling politics and
So this is
psychology.
something that you are constantly dealing with. A soft problem is your Okay. All right. So hard
Correct. It
problem
never
happens
it
a
never
little.
goes away. It's
Yeah.
you can get to the best possible state, but that's pretty much it.
So a hard
Now,
sorry, hard so hard problem is you can solve immediately. Soft problem is you can solve for now, and then a messy problem is
so a soft problem cannot be solved. You can only resolve it.
sorry, yeah,
So
resolve for
you
now.
solve a
Yeah.
hard problem, you resolve a soft problem,
Yeah.
and you dissolve a messy problem. These are actually wild cards. So they're tangled in our beliefs, our cultures, our contradictions. And
Hmm.
we talked about the disease outbreak
Yeah.
earlier, right? The
Yeah, yeah.
Ebola thing. Let's just go back to that. I mean, so you can imagine a scenario where there are hard solutions like barcodes and antibiotic delivery, and
Yeah.
these are all like doable. I
Hmm.
mean, if you want to think of express delivery, FedEx or other things, yeah, you can imagine those kind of things. And then if you want to map um, area, surveil, do a surveillance of this area to understand how the disease is spreading, or if you want to redesign your school to
Yeah.
stop germs, yeah, then I mean it's trickier. It's doable.
Yeah. Of course.
So then it becomes messy because communities' sacred rituals um, actually spread the disease.
Okay.
However offensive it might sound,
Yeah.
someone. This is where the
Yeah.
kind of the sensitivities come in, as we were
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
So messy problems, as I said, don't solve or resolve. You need to dissolve them, meaning you have to transform them into something altogether different so that you can even start to handle them. So, for example, how do you deal with the scenario that, okay, the people touching the deceased um is creating a transmission of the virus?
Okay.
So you cannot ask them to do it because the final rituals have to be done.
Yeah.
But then, how do you create a replacement that maybe creates a proxy where all the significance is transferred to that proxy? So
Okay.
some of my friends were anthropologists
Hmm.
did this, where they actually used a banana tree trunk
Okay.
as a proxy for the dead body, and people actually did their final send off to the banana
Ah.
tree trunk where the bodies were separated from it. So you're basically transferring the properties of a human into a banana tree trunk. So you have actually dissolved a problem, and you're able to manage um, the spread
So
of
this
the
is it's
virus,
like
which is otherwise very lethal.
using, I guess, a creative approach to dissolve a more intangible problem that if you were to try to brute force and treat like a hard problem or a soft problem would trigger immense sensitivity.
Exactly. And we fool ourselves if we think that, okay, a messy problem is actually a soft problem or a hard problem and so forth,
Hmm.
which takes us back to where you started the question.
Yeah.
Here's the kicker: these aren't separate problems, hard, soft, and messy.
Yeah.
The hard problem nests within the soft problems because
Hmm.
there are hard problems within soft problems, and then
Yes.
hard and soft problems nest within messy problems.
Yes.
So it's a layer, and that's where the wickedness kicks in.
Mm.
So if you look at, of course, one of the biggest issues that we all face, but it is so convenient to ignore,
Hmm.
climate change, for example. You can think of the hard solutions for climate change if you think of like solar panels or something. How
Yeah.
do you install them
Yeah.
and so forth? Then for soft problems, how do you convince people how to use them? Because some people might not believe in this. but maybe there's not a good a tax situation or incentive in a community to
Yeah.
do that, or
Yeah.
maybe the technology is simply just not available in certain
Okay.
areas and so forth. So those are soft problems.
Mm-hmm.
Messy problems, and people might, this is where the political angles of this, if you want to get creative, but if you want to have a fight over, okay, are solar panels replacing jobs, or creating jobs, or destroying forests, or those kinds of things. So you can optimize a hard problem. In this
Mm-hmm.
case, you can optimize a solar panel. You can satisfy the policies. We
Which
were
is a
talking
soft
about how do you
problem.
make people use them,
Soft problem.
and you idealize the values,
Yeah.
which is, so what are we trying to achieve out of this as a community together?
Mm-hmm.
But they're all snarled together, as you know, and
Yeah.
as we were just talking about.
Yeah.
Add to this, we're also numb to the word climate change right now,
Mm-hmm.
because it sounds so familiar
Yeah.
and foreign at once,
Yeah.
that we are like, yeah, so it's going to sting us, but I'm just going to dodge it.
Yeah.
So it's one of those problems here, because it's tainted by familiarity.
Interesting. Okay.
And I think that's the thing. So there are two scholars back in the 1970s who tried to characterize problems of the kind that we've been talking about.
Okay.
Horst Riddle and Melvin Weber.
Mm-hmm.
And they coined the term wicked problems.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the wicked problems have no clear start, no clear finish. They are symptoms of deeper issues.
Mm-hmm.
As we said, they are nested within one another, so you don't
Yeah.
exactly separate them out.
Yeah.
There are no right or wrong fixes.
Mm-hmm.
There are only better or worse bets that you take on them.
Okay.
And that's why they're wicked, because you're stuck learning as you go. You're constantly engaging with them. You cannot solve a wicked problem.
Yeah.
You cannot resolve a wicked problem. You cannot dissolve a wicked problem. You have to solve, resolve, and dissolve a wicked problem all at
Okay.
once. So that's
Yeah.
why it's like so now you think about it, we were going back to the evolutionary approaches of design,
Yeah.
evolutionary design, and
Yeah.
what AI does. Both have parallels. I mean, how do you do these kinds of things over and over and over again?
Yeah.
AI basically listens to, it might, I don't know, it might have a thought of its own with the
Mm-hmm.
reasoning and everything, but ultimately we are the ones who decide.
Yeah.
We need to override some of its tendencies to
Mm-hmm.
think about this. So when I say hard, soft, and messy
Mm-hmm.
problems collide, what I basically mean are, like, if you think of a puzzle, each and every piece of a puzzle is actually fighting back, fighting against one another.
So they're not coming together like they should.
Even if they seem like they're coexisting, they're in tension, and that's what makes it real.
Okay. Are there, I guess, misconceptions? Actually, no. Before that, how is there a level of, I guess, accountability, maybe for lack of a better word, in terms of deciding what type of problem you are facing?
Yeah, it goes back to, I mean, there, that is a utterly political question, Rishi. I
Yeah.
mean, because it's like, why does one problem gain more importance over another? Let's
Yeah.
say, for example, cancer gets greater funding and publicity than,
Yeah.
let's say, some neglected disease. So when they're all problems of different
Mm-hmm.
kinds,
Yeah.
but ultimately, I mean, human health as such, it's one of the greatest compositions, right? I mean, it is just a miracle. The fact that you can go to bed at night and wake up anew,
Yeah.
it is a whole new universe.
Yeah.
These little
Yeah.
magic that happens, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so it gets down to it, and that kind of takes me to, I mean, that is the sheer act of biological maintenance that gets us going day in and day out.
Mm-hmm.
So why do we, the body doesn't like to do anything novel, for example, or, like, anything disruptive. It tries
Yeah.
to preserve itself and conserve itself.
Balance.
So that's a kind of this biological tendency here. Yet as human beings, we like to create these disruptive technologies. We want to
Yeah.
go and shatter something, maybe uproot a previous platform and launch
Yeah.
an entirely new one and
Mm-hmm.
everything. Yet, I mean, there is interesting political situation. we, again, much like cancer and other high profile diseases, we tend to prioritize innovation, and novelty and newness and niftiness
Yeah.
over the boring humdrum of maintenance and care. I mean, that no
Hmm.
one wants to do about.
Yeah.
But um, it is that was our original act as humanity, to focus on maintenance. If you even go back to the creation of the Indus Valley that our
Yeah.
forefathers did
Yeah.
6,000 years ago, they
Yeah.
focused on um, not designer apps, they're focused on drains.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think so something that's where it starts and that's where it ends in
Hmm.
a way, but yet it gets no recognition
Yeah.
otherwise. So what you've asked is a profound question, is like, how do you choose to prioritize or identify
Yeah.
or publicize a problem that's in front of
Hmm.
you? And most often, I mean, we're all humans, we go after a problem that is lucrative, whether it's pays my
Okay.
salary or it helps achieve a market leadership or some kind,
Hmm.
or helps get a grant. Or so I think those are some of those um, parameters here. That itself is a soft problem
Yeah.
in a way,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
motivations here,
Yeah.
if you think
Okay.
about it.
Um, I don't want to take up too much of your time. So for my final question, I want to end with something a little more fun. Uh, if you could choose any extinct species to bring back, which one would it be and why? And you cannot say dinosaurs.
I cannot say dinosaurs.
No, because
Did not
that'd be
expect
very.
this question.
I think I purposely left this one out when I sent you the list of questions.
This is interesting. So let's. Okay, there are
Or
people who
if
are.
there is, or if you would like to say dinosaurs, um, it's fine as long as it's not something cliche like the T Rex, something
Well,
like that.
actually, let's talk about, because people talking about woolly mammoths and so forth, right?
Yeah,
But I'm not talking about woolly mammoth. I want to focus on their cousins. I think they were the
mastodon.
Colombian mammoths. So they went extinct. They disappeared around like 10,000, 11,000 years ago.
Okay.
And I think they would be my pick, because the woolly mammoths were, I mean, what, they were built for the ice age, right? So
Yes.
shaggy,
Yeah.
cold adaptation and so forth. But
Mhm.
the Colombians are more like us, because they thrived in the kind of the milder
Okay.
grasslands,
Yeah.
closer to our climate. So that makes it easier to integrate them into the world. So you can see the engineer
I
in me.
could.
Okay,
Yeah.
how do I make it
The
happen here? So
the sensitivity, the side effect. I was just
right,
about to
exactly.
comment on that.
But
Yeah.
actually, let's think about. You've got me thinking about this since I didn't expect this question. So let's do a little bit of an engineering experiment here.
Okay.
Okay, we resurrected the Colombian mammoths.
Yeah.
Now, how do we create a, a condition or a
Mhm.
community where we actually coexist with them? And we'll need big changes. It's not just, okay, yeah, well, there comes the Colombian mammoth. It's much more than that. Okay, now what do we do with them?
Yeah.
The first is we need to give them space,
Yes.
because they're huge and they roam around vast prairies, I
Mhm.
guess. So we will need to transform. Let's just focus on America, because let's say if we focus on India or something, there's just hardly any space here. But let's
Yeah.
just focus on America. So we would have to transform patches of these the Great Plains, for example.
Okay.
So unused farmlands or something like that into kind of the managed grasslands. Again, we are not creating a zoo for them, but we are trying to
Yeah.
create a condition so that they
So
can survive.
they're being left in the wild,
Exactly.
wild animals. Okay.
Right. So you got the
So
space.
yeah, I was gonna
The
say,
sec.
what about climate? Like
Yeah. So
to
we'll
mimic
get
the
to that.
climate
So
that they were.
exactly. So let's take it step by step here. The
Yeah.
kind of the systems approach. So we got with the space. Let's that's the kind of the initial step here. Then we
Mhm.
need to create some buffer zones, right? I mean, like, we, I don't know, motion sensors, some fences or something like that to keep them in some place where they're comfortable. We are
Mhm.
not talking about Jurassic Park, but I'm almost gaining ideas from there. So
Yeah.
to keep them out of roads and out of town, so we give them a separate community where they can be
Okay.
part of it. Okay, which means the infrastructure also needs to shift, right? I mean, let's say if they
Mhm.
do go around and we have to build some bridges or something like that for
Mhm.
them, it needs to be adapted for their
Yeah.
rate if a herd of them goes, and or which means we might have to redirect some rural highways, or I don't know, maybe design a migration route for them. I
Yeah.
don't know what their patterns are, whether they stay in one place or go around. So we'll have to
Yeah.
learn.
Yeah.
It's food, right? Let's
Okay.
focus on that. They're big. They
Yeah.
love to eat tons of grass, I guess. So we'll have to probably engineer some water systems. I
Okay.
mean, to provide that volume, because I don't know if what we have normally just organically grown is going to be sufficient for them. I just don't know.
Yeah.
So let's think of an irrigation system for that. I don't know. Maybe we'll have to do some rainwater capture or drip irrigation or something like that. I'm just thinking about all sorts of things that could happen in an engineering.
Yeah.
Okay,
No,
how do
no.
we
This
make
is
it
this is
happen,
this is
right?
good. This is good.
So that they are in plain lush, even in a drought, because they have to survive.
Okay. So
Okay,
you want them to have enough or create an irrigation system where they have enough water even in a drought to survive.
correct. I
All
think that
all
would be the
all
nice. I think that would be the nice thing to do for the Colombian mammoths.
all other animals can die if they die from the
I
drought.
love elephants, so I'll do anything to make them happy here.
Okay.
I'm not worried about T Rexes, as you said, but now gets to the temperature, right?
Yes.
I think um, they can handle our warm summers. I'm not too sure about our winters, but they're in the Great Plains. I think they're okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we still need to plant some trees and shade so that they can walk around. And the elephants, as you've seen on TV, I mean, they love to go as herd, sleep under trees, and
Yeah.
so forth.
Yeah.
So I think it's a that's a fix that could be managed. Well, this is interesting, right? I mean, just this thought process that
Yeah.
we were just unplanned thought process. Thanks to your question.
Hmm.
Um, I would not just be interested in resurrecting a biological species. I want to also resurrect, let's say, a lost cognitive species, so to speak. I
What
mean,
does that mean?
this lost way of integrative systems thinking that used to be normal at one point. If you even go back to the Indus Valley, which makes no sense for us, which is just completely lost because we're all so hyper specialized, because there's no I cannot go on a street and say that I'm an engineer. Immediately the question will come, what kind? And so I think that that is the kind of the situation we find ourselves in, the ability to hold these multiple perspectives. Now we have to think from the perspective of a Colombian mammoth, which is
Yes.
extinct.
Yes.
Now, how is it possible? And we don't even have the luxury or the budget or the environment to allow us to do that. So, but coexisting with mammoths would demand that kind of a thinking.
It
Wouldn't
would.
you agree? I mean, right? It's
Yes.
like, how do you anticipate the impact that they might have on our living and vice versa?
Well, when we were talking about the climate, I looked up sort of the climate that they were accustomed to when
Uh
they
huh.
were around.
Yeah. What did you find?
Honestly, it seems quite general in terms of habitats. It's grassland, savanna, wetlands, and mountains. Um, they lived in near streams, meadows, even some steppe tundra habitats, and then their
Okay.
elevation didn't particularly matter. It was from sea level to high elevation mountains. And
So I
so,
think we're good. So the Great
yeah,
Plains is going to work out very
yeah,
well for
Great
them.
Plains works. What I was thinking is that because by bringing up the topic of coexistence, how much coexistence is there if say the majority of the human population, or on in America at least, tends to live in more urban and suburban settings, and then if we put the Colombian mammoths in in the Great Plains, for example, how much real interaction is there between humans and these animals?
I'm hoping there's some interaction here because I
So
think
there'll definitely be like when we go to like a Yellowstone National Park type of thing, and we see the bison there. Other than that level of interaction, I don't know how much there could be because it's not like we've put them in a national park. We've let them roam around like wild animals. Um, it could even be like going on an African safari in Africa, and you go around in the jeep, but you're trying to find these animals as they are in the wild. It's not like they're in a
yeah.
Yellowstone of Africa. And so coexistence, whenever I thought of coexistence, I thought you and whoever you want to coexist with would live closer together.
No, they are in the same.
Vicinity.
Yeah,
Maybe.
well, they're in the same nature. I mean, they're not going to be renting apartments in DC. I mean,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I think it's the idea of okay, they are part of my system now. I mean,
Hmm.
and let's say if they eventually become, I don't know, some keystone species or something like that, what impact might they have, and what kinds? And that's going to take a long thing. So this is basically a startup package that we give them as after we resurrect them
Yeah,
when the
yeah,
hordes of them showing up.
yeah.
But That's the idea here, right? I mean, how do you create an environment
I w-
for these giants,
yes, yes.
one big step at a time?
Hmm. One thing I just also thought of was that to mitigate for side effects, if you bring back Colombian mammoths, Colombian mammoths, then you would have to bring back, or assuming they eat vegetation. Let's assume that we have enough vegetation for them to eat. You would also have to bring back whoever ate them, because you can't have their population sort of grow indefinitely and sort of take up all the resources of whatever system that they're living in.
Exactly, Rishi. So now we get this. You can see the engineering process here. So
Yeah,
it's not just someone asking, "Oh yeah, sure, let's bring in a T-Rex." No, you got to create an
yeah,
environment. That's an engineering. I mean, the
yeah,
infrastructure, the urban. I mean, their
yeah,
environment and
yeah.
what they're going to feed on, how they're going to reproduce, and all
Hmm.
sorts of things. So you're creating a
You have to
system.
consider
Think
every
about it.
possible
Think this is
variable.
almost identical. I mean, that's how it has taken the earliest civilization was 6,000 years ago, the modern way, right? I mean, it has taken 6,000 years for us to come to Zoom and us
Yeah,
having a
yeah,
conversation. So I think it's going to take that while, but our forefather ancestors focused on maintenance, and here we are trying to focus on trees, Great Plains, and so forth. So we'll give
yeah,
them a startup package. Let's see how they go from
yeah,
there. Is how I would think. That's the kind of the civilizational pulse that we can provide
yeah.
for the Colombian mammoths.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's all the time we have for
Well,
today.
thanks, Rishi. I've never
Yeah,
thought about Colombian mammoths
yeah.
before, and
I really enjoyed the
we kind of
discussion.
jammed
Yeah,
on it, so I really
yeah, yeah.
appreciated it.
It was great. Thank you very much.
A pleasure.